record.
Right, since people are still winging in about 1 or 2 a second.
Yeah, give them a couple of minutes, I think.
Give it a couple of minutes.
Times.
Just like to say something to Katu, whose name I can see here. You did ask us if somebody would take notes, but if you're here, maybe you can jot down what notes you want. The man who normally takes notes, I can see, isn't here. So is that okay that you know what you need to note? Yes, good. And I also see that we've got our Swarthmore Lecturer, Ben Jarman, here, because I'm going to be quoting from him later on. Maybe maybe he'll find it's better if he quotes from himself. But, so just while I'm sort of in notices mode, the recording, there will be a link to the recording and information on the front page of our website, www.qicj.org. And you'll also see before long a notice of the next session that we're going to have, which is a combination of QICJ and something called JAG, J-A-A-G, which is monitoring the use of algorithms in the criminal justice and looking at this whole area. And we've arranged a joint session on the 25th of November. Again, we will let you know if you're in our circulation. If you're not part of QICJ, you might find that it's worthwhile looking at the membership section of the website, because for quite a small charge, you have the newsletters, you have access to the conference, but you also have the circulation emails that we send to everybody to help keep people up to date. So I think we'll now do what we always do and start with some silence.
Oh, he's a gastroenterologist and worked with Sheila Sherlock, was my
Melanie, I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
Ah, yes, it has unmuted. It has unmuted now. Good. Okay. Welcome, friends, for the third of our 3 sessions on the good, the bad, and the ugly. My concept of the ugly was the ugly narrative that so often surrounds any talk about prisoners in the tabloids. And one example I'll never forget is the Daily Mail or some such announcing that prisoners had breakfast in bed, which you interpret they're given some little breakfast pack at 4:30 before they're banged up. And yes, they do eat it in their cell because, as I think Liz said, that idea of prisoners going to a dining room and dining together it is rarely the case. More recently, there was a terrible outcry because prisoners who were released at the 40% stage of their sentence rather than the 50% and then went on to be supervised in the community were celebrating. And there was a tremendous fuss made because they were celebrating. I think most of us will remember Michael Howard announcing prison works and all these what works units. I used to have folders for all the what works units and keeping on top of what they were doing. But what we also know is that research consistently says that actually deterrence doesn't work. It's desistance is what works and rehabilitation is what works. And we had a look at a sort of gold-plated example of rehabilitation, didn't we, to start us off on Monday with the Barlini Institute. So now I suppose one glimmer of hope is that we have a prisons minister who understands all about rehabilitation, James Timpson, who has said that many people who are in prison shouldn't be there. And there is some hope in the independent review that it looks like is going ahead on sentencing. And what we're hoping very much is that it's not just going to look at short sentences, it's going to look at sentence inflation that keeps people in prison for longer and longer and longer. I think challenging this ugly phrase is that much loved Quaker aspiration answering that of God in everyone. And today I'm going to ask a former prison governor, a chaplain, and a doctor who has looked very closely into adverse childhood experiences to talk to us for a little bit about how they see this concept of answering that of God in everyone as it relates to prisoners. And then we're going to move on to an initiative that's taking up quite a lot of time for a small working group in QICJ, and that is looking at the whole issue of how we welcome former prisoners, what the process is, what the hurdles are. And this is something that was flagged up in the Swarthmore Lecture. And what I found quite useful is not only the lecture itself, but an interview on the with Rebecca Harvey on the in the 6th of September issue of The Friend with Ben Jarman. And there's a bit strange quoting from somebody who is here, but what he was asked was if you could distill your message into one thing you wanted to get across, what would it be? And Ben said to Rebecca, I think it's that the way the system deals with people who have done bad things, and the only thing that's considered important is whether they are a risk or not. It neglects other considerations which are really quite important. I think it matters if someone regrets what they have done. I think people's voices and hearing what happens to them when they serve very long prison sentences is important too. and that their experiences do deserve consideration. Ben was also asked, bearing in mind we have a new government, if there's one thing in the criminal justice system that you could see changed, what would it be? And he said, my answer is partly conditioned by the fact I know that the criminal justice system is operating at far too large a scale, and it's not going to get a massive injection of cash. It's probably going to be asked to make cuts as usual. There's plenty that should be fixed about how prisons are run, staffed, and the physical conditions. And we heard all about that, didn't we, last Thursday? But the simplest change there should be is an across-the-board reduction in sentence length. It's a difficult thing for governments to accept because politically it looks like they're being soft. But if you just keep people in for less time, you can already do what you're going to do with them, but there's a stronger incentive from their point of view to do their best. The reason I was so excited by this lecture is that Ben was talking about the group of prisoners that I see every month, which is at a high security prison with many, many years, often 2 decades to serve. And it's as though nothing gets started until they get within the finishing line. So they're just marking time. And the point that I got from Ben's lecture, rather than the interview, I think, was this phrase, answering that of God in everyone, clearly resonates with him. And he talked about the implications of belonging, of excluded, the importance of reconnecting, the issue of proximity. And he said, how close are we prepared to get? And I wonder, could you, Sarah, unmute Tim Newell?
Yeah.
Because we'd like now just to see what Tim's take is on this issue of getting very close to prisoners and answering that of God in them. I can't see where you are, Tim, with all these little faces. There you are. So could we just hear your response to this issue? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I think it's important that that people who've committed serious offences recognise the seriousness of it, and that can be very difficult for them sometimes. And I've known 1 or 2 people who, because they've probably through therapy and through discussions and through work, have actually cannot live with themselves because of accepting what they have done and the damage they've caused. So I think the dignity of an individual is dependent upon that capacity to take responsibility for what they've done. And in any restorative justice process, as you know, it is that degree of sort of understanding what has happened and the implications of what has happened that actually brings about considerable change in the person who's been affected. That's in a restorative meeting, but which are few and far between. But in the process of any prison sentence, in order, I think, for it to be effective, there has to come a time when the person really does understand what they've done, and unless that happens, then the likelihood is that they will go out feeling justified and angry and aggressive towards the people who put them into prison, rather than beginning to take some responsibility for it. It's a big ask, but it's certainly what the men in Grendon seek to do. I was very impressed. I've been out of the place for 20 years now, but going back last year, I went back into a group meeting, and people introduced themselves partly by their name, but also partly by acknowledging their victim, and that they were in prison. They were there only because of what they had done to other people. And I think that's a very adult, responsible thing to do. And it's not something it's something that will counter all the ugliness which is poured upon them, because they are behaving as proper citizens and ready to return to citizenship and to take responsibility for their lives again, rather than blaming others or seeking to justify their behavior by the circumstances they found themselves in. So I think that although it's a challenging sort of ask, it's really, in order to stop being ugly, I would hope that people in prison could actually acknowledge that something has gone wrong in their citizenship, and that somehow they need to do something about it during this time of penance, if you like, in the penitentiary. That's what they're there for. They're there to actually acknowledge and begin to make good again. I mean, the Quakers in setting up prisons in America went a bit too far in setting up silent system penitentiaries. But that's what they were there for. That's what they were called, in order that people could be penitent about what they'd done. And I think that's something that we don't accept, that there's some psychological need for people to feel that their past behavior was grossly unacceptable and has to be different in order that they can resume their place in the community. Now, that's very difficult to achieve in most prisons, and that's why, sadly, I think prison is the only place where people can get the sort of therapy which involves 3, 4, 5 years of group work and community work, which there are now some 600 people in our English prisons who are in some form of therapeutic community. And I give thanks for that, because I think it's belonging to a community that actually helps you to realize what kind of person you are. And as Ben said, a sense of belonging, because it's only by people that you respect and that you love that perhaps you begin to listen and you really take on board what they're saying. And I think it's in those communities that kind of respect and friendship and acceptance and acknowledgement of the worst of your past can be possible. So, although there are only 600 people in that kind of place, I think I would hope that if the population could be reduced, then all the other good workshops and courses and programs which the prison service has developed over the years. I mean, there's been an amazing wealth of programs which have been well researched and well applied and meet the criteria of the what works sort of stipulations. If only there were a bit more space, more and more people could come to those. So that would be my initial thoughts. I hope that's been helpful.
I think that's very helpful, Tim, because it's speaking out of your deep knowledge and experience. Could we let us just have a minute before I'm going to ask you, Sarah, to say something about answering that of God through being a prison chaplain.
Okay, thanks. I have to say that I'm actually an ex-prison chaplain. I did work for 10 years at Long Lartin, but I'm no longer a chaplain at the moment. I'm doing other things within prison. And I found it interesting what Tim was saying and really refreshing. But it's so sad that there's less than 1% of people in prison who get a chance to be in a therapeutic community. And we need to do something about that. I think it's such a huge jump for some people who are in a normal another sort of prison, where it's all based on punishment and people looking down on you. It's such a huge jump to start to realise a lot of the prisoners haven't got very much emotional intelligence because of their backgrounds and things. And I think, and I'm sure other Quaker chaplains would agree, that if you go in with an open mind and accepting people for who they are, just as you'd go into any place and meet new people, don't go in with a judgmental frame of mind, and try to see that of God in each person. I think showing acceptance and respect has a really powerful effect on people who are in that sort of punitive environment all the time. Being a prison chaplain is such a wide thing, because some prison chaplains are paid and some are voluntary. Some go in for 4 days a week, some go in one afternoon a week or one morning or something. So there's a huge scope in what prison chaplains are able to do. I was lucky at Long Lartin that I was encouraged to be part of the team and to do the statutory duties, which means you have to go and visit the prisoners in SEG, which is the punishment unit, and healthcare, and also attend adjudications where they've done something wrong and a governor has to decide on what the punishment will be or whether they're guilty or not. And that's just a presence there, really, to support the man who's going through this. But there are lots of what I would call softer things that we're able to do as chaplains, apart from the statutory things. When I first went, I took over a scheme to allow the prisoners to have a plant in their cell. And, that plant had such a big impact on them because it was something that was living that they were responsible for. And they loved those plants. And I used to get messages, please come down, I think my plant's dying, and I'd go down and they looked a heck of a lot more healthy than any of my plants at home, and but it was a really valuable thing. But eventually high security took over, and I think the mainly the prison officers got fed up of searching the plants for hidden drugs or something like that. So in the end, that folded, and they weren't allowed their plants, and they were so upset when they had to give up their plants. I was able to arrange a marriage between two of the men. You're allowed to get married in prison, and none of the other chaplains felt comfortable in doing that. So I felt that was a real privilege that I was able to arrange that for them and see it through. We also set up the Quaker meeting, which a lot of prisons do have a Quaker meeting. We set up ours, and what was slightly different about ours was one of the prison rules is if a prisoner registers as a certain religion, then they're not allowed to go to the worship or the meetings of another religion. So if they registered as Quaker, or if they were registered as a Roman Catholic, they couldn't come to the Quaker meeting. So we spent a long time fighting this and explaining that, out on the outside, anybody can come to a Quaker meeting. You don't even have to be registered as anything. And eventually they gave in, and all sorts of people came. They'd go to their own services on Sunday or something, but they'd also come to the Quaker meeting, and I think they just came because they loved the silence and the acceptance, and the experience of a Quaker meeting, which you can't quantify really. And another thing we managed to do while I was there was there was some research that had come out, or probably just reiterated, about a lot of crime being the result of unresolved grief. So we ran a bereavement course called Living with Loss, which ran over 6 weeks, I think it was. And that was quite popular with the prisoners because a lot of them had lost somebody close to them, or more than one person. And of course, particularly in a high security prison, they're very rarely allowed to attend the funeral. We used to have them up into the chapel, and they could light a candle and just perhaps have a silent time while the funeral was on. But that was a huge difficulty for them, and so I felt that was something helpful for them. But overall, I mustn't go on. Overall, I think it's just that acceptance, and acceptance with no agenda, just being on person to person. Okay, thanks, Melanie.
Thank you, Sarah. There's a lot that wouldn't have happened in Long Lartin if it hadn't been for you and Judy. And I find it a very bleak place. We had a poet in Long Lartin who's now been transferred to another prison, who, after a very difficult childhood, if I'm right, I think Hugh will know, he came in to prison at 22. He's probably now 53. His tariff was 16 years and he's twice that. But he did write a poem about our meeting for worship called Silence Inside, and I'll just read you some of that. With candle flame glowing, we sit in silence, thinking what we think, our thoughts travelling from place to place, from person to person, from thing to thing, walking the roads of our mind, though we try not to ponder, just hoping to find only a small wonder or a soul uplift from the place we live within. Oh, from the place we live within is full of unsettling rift or other meaningless sin. So for a moment within our lives, we search for something special to ease our strife. We search for ourselves. We search for ourselves. Thank you, George, for that lovely poem appreciating our Quaker meeting in Long Lartin. I think Tim has mentioned the victims, how the prisoners in Gwendon seem to have really internalised this way of considering their crime, that there are victims, that they have done something wrong. And it's so different from a single view of risk, that everything is just predated on how much risk somebody does or doesn't present. I wondered if you could just say a few words, and I'm afraid this is such a huge area, this area of prisoners who were first victims before they made victims themselves due to adverse childhood experiences. And I'm afraid we haven't long, but maybe Hugh, out of all your knowledge, you could just give us a flavour. If you'd like to speak now, please.
Shall I try and talk very quickly, or
just give us a flavour? I think that's all we can hope for.
Between being antisocial and being a criminal or doing criminal things. And by being antisocial, what I'm referring to is the idea that somebody could actually think that the world is not a nice place. People don't like them. People look down on them. They're nasty to them. And that gets me into the topic of adverse childhood experiences, or to put it in ordinary English, being abused as a child. Now, I got involved with this as a doctor, and it's too big to go into that. But there are so many facts. For example, people who have committed violent crime have almost inevitably come out of a home, a childhood place home, where there was violence. And secondly, there is this scheme, which is now well recognized, called adverse childhood experiences, which is an extraordinarily simple test of asking 10 yes/no questions. And that sounds pretty naive, but actually the results of this show very clearly that if you have 4 or more so-called adverse childhood experiences, you are 30 times more likely to attempt suicide than somebody who had no such adverse experiences. It has a colossal effect on the person, not only in their behaviors, but also on their brain. So, for example, the structure of their brain is different. They have a much larger amygdala, which is the bit that enables us to fly off the handle. It also shows that people respond differently to different images that are projected to them. I could go into this in a great more detail, but the reality is that if people are abused as children, they are likely to be antisocial. They are likely to be struggling to survive, both in terms of suicide rates and other things. And the only study that I'm aware of, large study in prison, showed that the precise figure was actually 49% of male prisons and male prison in Wales were seriously abused as children. We're not talking about just the odd bit of abuse, we're talking about serious abuse, as I say, at a level of at least 4 out of 10. Large amounts of data, about 15,000 peer-reviewed papers using this methodology, so it's well-established methodology. And in a word, very large numbers of people who are in prison have been seriously abused, not necessarily sexually, sorry, that was a mistake, but they've been seriously abused as children. And if we can look at prison, part of prison at least, as being abuse, further undermining their self-esteem, and not being a very friendly place, then it's likely to do more harm than good. So, in a word, very many prisoners, people in prison, have been abused. How should we treat them? Do we treat them with kindness and get them to begin to recognize that the world can be a friendly place, which is precisely what goes on in the therapeutic community? Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. That was perfect. I do notice in the emails I get from CLINCS, which is the network for voluntary organisations in the prison. Oh, right. I don't know why I keep getting muted. Yes, so what I was saying was, I think while I was muted, I noticed in the mailings that I get from CLINCS, which is the organisation for voluntary groups and charities concerned with prisons, that there are a growing number of trauma-informed courses. And anyone who wants to look at this area more, 3 years ago now at Amadown, we had a whole conference looking at adverse childhood experiences. And we always managed to get really top-rate speakers. So on our website under conferences, you'll see one with this title, and it opens up to give all the input that we had for that conference. For the last 10 minutes or so, I want to speak about welcoming former prisoners into meetings, but in this section that we have now, can I open it up to anyone here who'd like to respond to what we've heard from either Tim about being a governor, Sarah about being a chaplain, Hugh reminding us about adverse childhood experiences, or anything else that's in this general area. Sarah and I are having to scan 2 pages, so either a real hand or a yellow hand, and we'll hope to spot you and unmute you. Is Dorothy, are you wanting to come in?
Sally's got a hand up.
Yes, let's have Sally then.
I used to work as a psychotherapist with children who were experiencing the adverse childhood experiences. And I just wanted to say that, tied in with some of the stuff that was said about the amygdala, it's also about scanning for threats, because the world as a child seems like an incredibly dangerous and unpredictable place. They spend their time scanning for threats so that they're always expecting things to be threatening. And there was some study, sorry, I'm retired, so it's a while ago now, about perceived facial expressions that were seen as expressing disgust, even though that wasn't the expression. They just read it as that because of their previous experiences.
Mm.
And we've
Could
got
we have Mary? Yeah, Mary Byrne.
Yes, I've been concerned for a long time as what we can do about this ugly picture that the media presents, which is so far from the truth. And I did think that we'd got a government that might actually do something about criminal justice, but they didn't, because they've got the gutter press to cope with. What can anyone suggest what we can do about the gutter press?
Is anybody able to, Celia, I don't know whether you're responding to that or opening up a different issue. Can you unmute Celia?
I'm just looking for her. Can't even find her. Can you unmute yourself, Celia? I can't find you on the list. There you are. Right. We should be able to now.
Yes, I was going to say it's very, very difficult when the gutter press and feeds this into people. And I think that we have to tackle this by educating people on the outside that prisoners are just like them. One day they're free, and then the next day they're a prisoner, and another day they're free again and a citizen of this country. And I work as a volunteer in the NHS, and I've seen reactions that are appalling because we get prisoners coming in, and they're obviously chained and have 2 prison staff with them. But I've actually seen somebody make the sign of a gun with their fingers as a woman left. She was a woman prisoner. And others that say they shouldn't be coming into this NHS hospital. So it's ingrained. And how we change the narrative, I don't know. So I'm not giving any clues, but we really do need to change the narrative of the populace to say that these people could be you. They are ordinary folk who have done something wrong. And it's very, very difficult. And I find it heartbreaking at times, you know, meeting people coming in and even I always address the patient, and the patient is the prisoner, but very few people do.
I remember, Ben, in your Swarthmore lecture, you had some examples from that terrible London Bridge attack of prisoners who behaved in an extraordinarily courageous and noble way. So whether it's just finding, what are two examples going to do that? Well, they're better than nothing, but any more responses? Because this is really, I think, the heart of what we're looking at today, challenging this ugly narrative. So can anyone else come in on that? So I can see Leslie and Jonathan.
Right.
So shall we have Jonathan first and then Leslie? Jonathan
Okay.
later.
Yeah.
I've just put a message up in the chat in response to something Tim was saying. I don't know if anybody can see it. What I've said was I do. Gosh, wait a minute. I said from my own experiences, the courses Tim mentions that are held in prison for change do work, but the offender has to want them and to want to change. And Tim responded, yes, indeed, and there should be plenty of discussion around the issues that come up to place it all in perspective with the consequences. So what next? And I just went on to say, I do feel that if this is done while the offender can remain in the community, that's being treated with courses and so on, therapy, there would be more likelihood of him accepting the need for change and thus wanting to change. Because in prison, this is from lots of experience, there's a lot of peer pressure to withstand the system and refuse to cooperate. And then men who could be helped fall through the treatment programs by merely giving the answers the psychologists want to hear without actually getting involved and benefiting from what's on offer. I think this is a powerful argument for keeping most people out of prison, especially where there's a chance of rehabilitation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can we move on to Leslie now?
Leslie, yeah.
Mm.
Can't see her name.
Just wanted to say something about the gutter press and the way the press conflates people with bad behaviour and creates bad people. So the general public just sees and reads and hears about bad people, which is very polarizing. So if we could, if I could, if all of us could just be aware that this is about bad behavior, and it can be one single bad behavior that gets people into prison, rather than being bad people. I just don't think the general public thinks that way enough.
Thank you. Robert Wilson.
Yeah, we already mentioned right at the beginning of this about seeing that of God in everyone. And for Quakers, this is the real clue. For most of us as Quakers, we can't do anything about what is happening in prisons. And we won't all be prison visitors. But there may come a time when a former prisoner wants to come to one of our meetings. And this is the time when Quakers can do something. And we need to see the individual. Now, I hope I'm not going to steal your thunder here, Melanie, but can I speak just a couple of minutes? Because I'm one of those who's on the team with you regarding welcoming former prisoners. And
Yes,
it does
well, we
mean,
were, since we were about to move on to that, while you're speaking, you make your contribution.
yes. So, friends here, I'm a retired police officer. I did my 30 years, and I have, since I've retired, met people who are former prisoners, and it's I met them obviously while I was a police officer myself, and so as soon as anybody had been been a prisoner, police officers have an opinion about them, and they treat them roughly and badly because it's them and the same people over and over again. My experience of when I retired, and I actually went into a prison on an occasion to speak to prisoners in an AA meeting. And a lot of those people who were in there for short periods of time were young people, young men who were full of fear. And it's their fear that had got them into trouble. And in listening to their stories, I also had to admit that in all of us, there is the capability to do things wrong. We can all be violent, we can all commit offences, and given the right circumstances, we can all kill. And I even mean Quakers. We can all kill. We've got to see people, that of God in everybody. When people come to our meetings and want to come and join us, they are quite often rejected by society as a whole. They have nowhere to live, nowhere to work. They're strangers, and they're frightened and fearful. They know if they come up against the authorities again, they will be treated roughly and probably end up back in prison. If we can spend some time meeting and speaking to them, getting to know them as human beings, which is what Hugh was talking about, their adverse childhood experiences, we can find out they're just people like you and me. We can make an enormous difference into their lives if we can let them come to our meetings and listen to them and give them a chance. So that's where I'm coming from when I'm, say, working on this project at the moment, where we must see a way to be able to welcome these people, not automatically reject them, automatically see the wrong, see them as individuals, that of God in everyone.
That leads nicely into this project that QICJ is involved in, following a number of queries from various meetings about how do we welcome former prisoners. So far, we've consulted with our membership as widely as we can, and we got to the stage of producing a draft document. And when that's gone round the committee, it will go round QICJ for their comment and input before going to the safeguarding officer, Mark Mitchell, and then hopefully sort of permeating through BYM. There was a document done in 2014 from the chaplaincy, but that seems to be quite out of date now. This little working group, Robert, Simon, Mike Nellis and myself, every time we meet, there seem to be more and more complications. The obvious complication is that if somebody has licence conditions, there then needs to be a contract with the authorities, with MAPA, as to what they can and can't do. And rather than this coming before the whole meeting, this comes to a receiving group, what we're calling a receiving group within a meeting, who discuss what is and what isn't possible. And of course, what comes to mind is people who must be in their licence that they're not in the same room as children. So what if you have a children's meeting? Well, maybe you have a midweek meeting without children. So we have people on licence, people not on licence, people not on licence, but on the sex offenders register, which is another kind of nuance. And because of this whole issue and the complication, something that that Robert has done in his meeting, is when we're very strongly advising you is to decide what your policy is first with the whole meeting, because if you have a former prisoner joining you, there will be an issue of confidentiality. So you can't open it out when you have the person in front of you to everybody, but you can in advance. And as well as the complications, the other thing that came forward very strongly is just what a lot of support there is. And the first obvious thing is our safeguarding officer, Mark Mitchell, working for BYM, and he's produced very thorough guidance. We've also got the Church Safeguarding Agency, 31.8, and again, they have a website and a lot of information. And then we have the Welcome Directory, which is a register of faith groups of all sorts that have signed up to say that they will welcome former prisoners. And then finally, you've got this little working group within QICJ that have been meeting and just trying to tease out all the issues. It turns out that the chaplains are actually under some obligation through prison service instructions to work with former prisoners and to pass them on where they wish to be connected to a local group. But I think not all chaplains are aware of this. So there's a whole lot that we are working through. And every time there's a newsletter, I let people know where we're up to. So I'm just thinking, while we're here together, and there's about 30 of us, is there anybody who would like to contribute any queries or any reactions on this topic of welcoming former prisoners into meetings? Can we hear from Marion? We haven't heard from Marion today. She always has sensible things to say.
Yes, and it's not so much a sensible thing to say, but just a query, really. Our meeting has had a request from HMP Ashfield, and this happened about 2 years ago, and there was a call went out from the area meeting clerk, and I think I was about the only person who responded positively, and then it didn't happen. But now it is about to happen again, and a whole group of people have expressed an interest. But I'm just kind of wondering sort of what from the group is available and when, and should we be kind of plugging into that, or receiving stuff that we can use. There is
yes, I think in that situation, Marion, to send you this draft document.
Yes.
It's just 2 pages, but it does have all the sources of support.
Yeah. That would be
I didn't want it to go any wider until it's been, seen by more people. But if anybody needs it, we'll definitely send it out.
Okay. Well, there are 2 meetings this week. One of which is tomorrow that I can't get to. One of which is on Friday, which I can get to. So if you have time this evening to send it along, then I can send it to the clerk immediately to be handy for tomorrow's meeting.
Meg, I can see a hand up there.
Oh, I can. Thank you. Yes. So I've not really been involved in this at all, other than I'm in central England, and the only things that we in our elders and pastoral friends support group, we were asked to consider a current offender who wanted to come into membership, and that kind of went through. But my question is, in terms of planning receiving groups and all sorts of things like that, is this envisaged that this happens at an area level or a local level? Because it seems to me that at the area level, you've got the area safeguarding officer and a team and everything like that. So that's just my question, I suppose.
Right. Yes, I'd like to bring Robert in there, but the former prisoner will be joining a local meeting,
Mm.
but it's probably useful if area meeting considers it. That means at least 4 meetings have considered it. But somebody, I don't know whether Jennifer is here who's done some of this safeguarding. Is there anybody in the room who can contribute to that? Robert?
Yeah, I would say through experience that if somebody's coming out on license with conditions, the approach will normally come through the area, because the authorities would contact probably the area meeting clerk, and therefore that would then go direct to the receiving group, or if you have one. If it's a former prisoner who wants to come to a meeting and he gets in touch, and I think there's a group at the moment, they could be approached direct to the local meeting, so it could be that way that it does come to you. I would suggest that if it's an approach that comes to the elders or the pastoral carers, that you don't immediately throw it open to the whole local meeting, although obviously we are supposed to all be equal, but be cautious with the information you get and disseminate it carefully before you proceed, because you can deny any hope of really discerning and finding a way forward if you get a knee-jerk reaction that says no, and this has happened in the past.
Thank you.
Shall we have Tim and then Marion, please?
Thank you. In our meeting in Aylesbury, we have someone has been a serious offender, and that person was there was a welcoming group appointed by area meeting to welcome that person into the area, and then that person chose to come to our particular meeting when they were released, and we were happy with that. We established a contract and everything, and made sure that the elders within our meeting were content with that development. And one good thing that happened as a result of appointing 3 friends to welcome the person was that those 3 friends have remained as a support group for the last 3 years or so. So instead of perhaps a circle of support and accountability, the person has had a Quaker support group that meet with him every quarter or so and review any issues which he may feel he has, and he knows he can contact us at any time. So I think having a local Quaker support group is quite a useful dynamic for someone coming into that setting.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, Marion then.
I just want to say that there is somebody, Jennifer Pierce, who also got her hand up.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Okay, so shall I continue? I'll be brief. I just want to say that our area meeting is looking at setting up a group which is area meeting wide, and that's just because there probably aren't enough people in any one meeting, and we don't know which meeting they're going to settle in, if they do. So I would think it would be much better to make sure that the area meeting is involved, because it's quite a big undertaking, and maybe that then you have to involve the local meeting too. But I just also wanted to ask whether the working group is making links with these circles of support and accountability. I mean, they are quite active in some areas, and I imagine they do a lot of training. So, it might be that we can learn from them or use some of their resources and facilities and training have some kind of link. I didn't know whether that's already kind of part of what you're working on.
That is a useful resource that I haven't got down on my list of 4 resources. So obviously circles. Right, sorry, Jennifer, I didn't see your hand because there's a sort of yellow background and the yellow hand just wasn't showing up. So
sorry about that.
No, right, it's not your fault.
When this has come up a couple of times in our area, and it's come to me as the safeguarding coordinator, and we have managed it firstly by making sure that we met with both the prisoner who was to be discharged and with either whoever was supervising them, probation officer, police officer. And where it works successfully, it does seem to depend on being able to have that honest conversation with them so that everybody is clear. And that's a very small meeting, myself, the probation officer, and the person concerned. So we're very clear about what has happened, and we're very clear about what ground rules we need to have in place. They have started to attend a local meeting, and a very small receiving group has been in place to support them. This seems to work very well. We have a contract which is signed by them, the receiving group, and myself, and that was supplied by Mark Mitchell. And I think it can work well, but a lot depends on honesty on all sides.
I think the area meeting is going to get involved because if it's an area meeting that has the safeguarding officer, so the area meeting safeguarding officer is going to be involved. I submit in our meeting when we had this situation, there didn't seem to be area meeting safeguarding officers. This was quite some time ago. I'd like to draw this to a close quite soon, but not to deny anybody who really feels they would like to contribute the chance to say something. So I think So and I just whizzing back and forth between these 2 pages, trying to see if there's any little yellow hands or actual hands. Really, it seems to me quite important to continue this conversation with reflections that may have arisen from the whole series of talks that we've had. I mean, one way is writing to me, and the QICJ people can get hold of me. For anybody else, you can just put a hyphen in the middle of my name, Melanie-Jameson @outlook.com, if you have any reflections. But we have twice sent a call round the QICJ membership to do with the welcoming former prisoners, just to see what contributions that you wish to make to that debate. Can you see any hands, Sarah? Are we ready to?
No, I can't at the moment.
Good. Well, could I hand over to you, Ben, please, for just a few remarks, because we're rather pleased that you've come along, so it'd be nice to bring you in at this stage.
Thanks, Melanie, and hi everybody. I'm going to keep this fairly brief, partly because I wasn't expecting to say anything, but I'm really happy to be here, and it's really nice to see some thinking going on, sort of as a response to the lecture. I think what was I going to say? Yeah, I think probably the theme that I felt the most strongly about in the lecture was the theme of proximity and the idea of kind of being, I think of it now as being close enough to people to have to earn the right to have your own view rather than to experience this secondhand through stereotypes and media depictions. People have said on the call today, have expressed some of the sort of dismay that they feel around the ugliness of media depictions. And I share that, although I also feel as though my kind of the journey I've been on through the process of first doing prison work as a Quaker, and then getting more and more deeply involved, and then starting to do research, and then ending up witnessing the murder of a friend, is that there is actually, that to me, the kind of demand for truthfulness requires that we acknowledge some of the ugliness. And I think sometimes the ugliness that we hear about and that we see repeated, it does crowd out other stories, and it does jostle other more positive things out of the way. But sometimes I think it also reflects the very real kind of anger and indignation that people sometimes feel when they are confronted with things that are genuinely ugly. It's really positive to hear some of the things that are being said today, some of the initiatives that Quakers are taking. I'm also, in a qualified way, encouraged by some of the stuff we're seeing from the new government. I think the appointment of James Timpson as the new prisons minister, I think, made me more cheerful than almost anything else that's happened this year. And I'm also aware, I think it was announced in the last, maybe even today or maybe yesterday, I can't remember where I saw it, but that there's going to be the expected sentencing review is going to go ahead. And it's going to be chaired by David Gauke, the former Justice Secretary, who, when he was Justice Secretary, was making moves to abolish short sentences. So that feels like a hopeful topic as well. Yeah, so I'm very grateful that everybody's kind of starting to think about this and discussing the lecture and discussing how they can get closer and what they might be able to do. And I think there's a lot to welcome there. So yeah, I would just like to say, to give thanks for that, and to say, I think that, yeah, what people are doing in taking on that work is putting themselves in a position where they're going to be able to tell stories that do restore some nuance and paint some light around the darkness and the ugliness as well. So it's nice to see that. The only other thing I wanted to say, and I only found out about these yesterday as well, but I think it's really, I think they stand to be really interesting. But some of you might have seen that this year's Wreath Lectures are going to be given by Gwen Adshead, who is a very well-known forensic psychiatrist who used to work at Broadmoor, and they are themed around the topic of violence. And the first one is, I think, due to be broadcast at the end of November, towards the end of November. And I only found out about them yesterday. I've read Gwen Adshead's books, and I've read quite a lot of her academic papers as well. And I think she's a really interesting thinker. And she's also very interesting to me because she comes at these issues specifically from the perspective of someone as a person of faith. She's a forensic psychiatrist, but she's also a practicing Christian as well. So I think those will be really interesting. And one of them is going to be recorded in Grendon as well, with in front of a live audience there. So yeah, look out for those when they come in November. Thanks for letting me speak, Melanie, and my voice is going, so I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Right, friends, we've slightly run over, but I think there was a lot for us to say, and it's so good to have such a big group. I think we had about 30 of you before a few had to leave to just make their contributions. There's a few things on the chat here, like I see Ben Jarman has just given us the link for the Wreath Lectures. Again, this is something that we will circulate to QICJ members. It's obviously something that we need to be listening to. I also noticed this weekend there are 2 podcasts on prisons. One is After I Leave Prison. There's another one which I'm trying to get hold of. So it's, you know, it's very much sort of in the air. But I think, as Robert said, as Quakers, as friends, the thing that we need to do is just consider what we can do to help reintegrate people who've been in prison when they want to continue the very meaningful experience they've had of attending a Quaker meeting inside, on the outside. And we have noticed in our conferences just a sort of frustration and despair when they're not able to get to a meeting because of the risk that they're seen to pose. I mean, probably, quite justified, but there's something to do with managing expectations, I think. Right, I could ramble on, but I won't. So I think I'd like us just to sink into silence and then leave the meeting when we're ready. So goodbye, friends, and thank you for being with us.